let's dive in and find out how to foolproof your dam implementation. I can push the right button. Okay, so I did really want you to use the chat for this purpose, which is to share a dam horror story with us anytime during the session, anything that jogs your mind that you want to share. Now, if we can't get that chat working, unfortunately, we won't be able to do this. But maybe you could put it in the questions. I don't know. I'm not sure how that will work. Yeah, you could do that. Put it in the Q&A. We'll find it there, and we'll have to just sort out questions from chats. So let's do that. So at any time, if I kind of jog your memory or you feel like you've got something that relates or anything just you want to share, go ahead, put it in the Q&A. The goal for today is to help you avoid some of the blind spots that could derail your dam implementation. So we're going to be covering some common blind spots that we see organizations overlooking or just not being aware of when they're doing it dam initial implementation and kind of launch and early days in their dam journey. So we want you to avoid those, learn from others, and that's sharing these cautionary tales so that everybody can benefit. And at the very end of this session, there's going to be a couple things that we'll share. So stick around. We're going to give you access to a tool that will give you a personalized dam success guide. So we'll tell more about that at the end. And there's also going to be a special opportunity. It's only going to be for folks who are live at this webinar. So if you do have to run, you will get a recording of this session emailed to you, but it will not have that special opportunity. So we hope you can stay. You can learn what that's going to be, but it'll be an opportunity to kind of get some questions answered and get some live feedback for things. So we'll tell you more about that when we get there. So just, yeah, we'll get to those things at the end. Stick around. There'll be some stuff. Okay, so let's get into this. And I'll tell you who I am real quick. So my name is Kara Van Malsen, and I am the managing director at AVP. So for those of you who don't know AVP, we are a consulting firm, and we help organizations with all aspects of digital asset management. So everything from planning and strategy to selecting the right tools and systems, implementing those systems, scaling them, optimizing them, integrating them, data migration, all kinds of stuff. So we get into all aspects of DAM, and that's why we're able to share some stories, anonymized, of course, we're not naming any names here, but just that typify some of the issues that we see and that we want you to be aware of, just as cautionary tales, as I said. So a little bit of background, I started in DAM in 2006. And at the time I was an audiovisual archivist. That was my training. And I had, it looks like maybe the chat is working. So let's test it. Say hi in the chat and where you're located if you can. Let's see if that's working and give that a shot. So anyway, back to me. So I'm an audiovisual archivist. We digitize all kinds of media. And one day the marketing department comes along and says, hey, we need a better way to access this library of digital assets that you're building here. So we think we need a DAM system. And can you help us select and implement one? I had no idea what I was doing. I have never worked in DAM. I didn't know much about DAM systems. And it was like early-ish days in DAM, honestly, that 2005 and 6. So DAM had been around a little while, but it's nowhere the industry and marketplace that it is now. So I just really didn't know how to go about it. And I remember thinking, well, okay, we'll just show up to the vendor kickoff and they'll tell us what to do. So that's one lesson learned. I don't want you to do that. This is sort of its own horror story. And I ended up leaving that organization before I could see it all play out, but I kept up with my successor. And I do know it was quite a long slog to get that on track. And I believe in that case, we made all the mistakes I'm going to share with you today. So yeah, so I've been there, definitely. Yeah, so for whatever reason, I keep pushing the wrong button here. So fast forward a few years later, and I was working as a consultant at AVP. I have been here since 2011. So that's a long time to see a lot of different scenarios with different DAM organizations. And so we were helping all sorts of organizations with their dam journey. And we began seeing lots of different kinds of issues with big dam initiatives that were going sideways. And some of them were serious disasters. So I started to see some patterns and themes to the point where I could almost forecast these disasters after just one or two calls with an organization. So sometimes I kind of feel like this kid where I'm like, no, I'm trying to tell you about that. Yeah. But so that's why I'm sharing some of those with you today. And here's what I want you to take away from the call. And I'm seeing if I can do any chat troubleshooting. Sorry, we're trying to do what we can here, but it doesn't want to let us. Hold on. No. Okay, I don't know how to make it work. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Feel free to use the Q&A. So what I want you to take away today is this. To get the most out of your dam system, especially if you're in that early stage, you're gonna have some prep work to do. So don't do what I did and just show up to that vendor kickoff call and say, okay, now what? I want you to be ready so that you're prepared for all the things that are not just the technology and not just getting that system installed and up and running. You're gonna have to do a little bit more. So that's what I'm going to help you with today. All right, so there's going to be 3 blind spots that I'll talk you through stories. And so these kind of, like I said, they kind of typify some of the problems that we tend to see. And I think they tend to fall into these 3 buckets. So strategic oversight, operational gaps, and adoption shortfalls. So let me get started with the first one, strategic oversight. So let's just dive right in. All right, our first horror story. So this story is from a few years back. An organization reached out to us, and they had spent about 2 years working on a dam system implementation, and it had not launched yet. And in fact, they were quite a ways off from being ready to launch. People were losing trust in the project, and they were getting pressure from leadership to speed things up. So there was a lot of scrutiny on this project. So when we got into conversation with them, we started by asking, what is the problem that they're trying to solve? And so they kind of said it in a way that was like, well, our problem is that we don't have a dam system. Yeah, I get it. You know, if you don't have a dam system, it feels like a problem, but it's a problem because there's a bunch of other stuff behind that are like causing that to be a problem. So what we really want to do is learn those problems. And dam problems are not so unique. Most organizations have the similar set of problems here. So problems with finding assets, difficulty getting approval, collaboration problems, misuse of assets, license or rights violations, brand inconsistency. These kinds of things are very, very common. And so if we can really articulate what those are, then we can start to just envision what the future might look like, what outcome might we be looking for. So centralizing assets in one place would be an outcome, or faster asset discovery and retrieval, reduce risk of licensing and rights violations, for example, and improve collaboration, high performing content, all the things. So yeah, those ambitions can get pretty big, but the key here is to prioritize these and think of what is most critical to your organization. What are the biggest problems? And so what are the first outcomes that you need to solve for with this new system implementation? And so you might pick, just these first 3, for example, as your starting point. And those would be your priority goals for this new dam system. And if we can establish those priorities, it's going to be a lot easier to get to some ROI a little early in the process. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. And by the way, I'm going to put this link in the chat. I guess maybe we can put things in the chat, but you can't. So we'll see if that works. This is a great blog post by Acquia, the dam provider, that talks about identifying desired outcomes for your dam system and how you can use that for your strategy. So let's continue on our journey with this scenario that I'm talking about, this organization. So So they weren't really articulating the problem and the outcome that they were looking for. It was a little bit of everything. And so we said, okay, well, what's the scope of the dam? What's going to go in there? And so we heard something here that's something we've heard in a lot of cases, which is, well, everything's going in. But when you really think about what is everything, that can be a lot of stuff. It's a lot. And so you got to get a little more specific. Everything is too much, and everything cannot be handled. Probably not everything needs to go in the dam, and you can't do everything at once. So it's both in terms of the types of assets that are going to be housed and stored in this dam system, but also metadata. Because here's another thing that we see a lot where people say, well, all the assets and we need all the metadata. And they're like, there's 250 fields. And you're like, I'm not sure if it's going to work. It's just a bit much. It's going to be very difficult to make that work. So we got to scale it back. We got to scope it a little bit, thinking about those priorities, as I said, and what we would want to see as an outcome that would be really of high value to our organization and have an impact. So thinking about how to create a realistic scope for the dam system, what we like to do is think about the use cases that this is trying to enable. So, thinking about finding assets. Well, who needs to find assets and why? What do they need to do? So think about marketing team. They need quick access to assets for their campaigns, and they need to be branded and approved. And then we have our regional distributors, and they need access to the most recent approved product assets, and then templates for their local collateral. And then we also have our development team, and they need to be able to find and share assets for fundraising campaigns. I'm just making up hypothetical examples here, but if you take a look and think about, okay, we have these top priority goals, who needs to do those things, and then what do they need? You can start to answer the question of which assets should we prioritize in scope for the dam. So here we might think, okay, marketing needs photos, they need logos, they need product images. And then our distributors also need logos and product images. So starting to see a theme there. And our development team also needs photos. So when we start to see those patterns, it helps know like what are the most priority assets for these teams, and then which metadata are going to be enable their search and use scenarios. So that helps us prioritize where to start with that system. Okay, so back to our story again. So in this case, again, they said, well, it's all the problems, all the outcomes, all the assets, all the metadata. And oh, by the way, we need to integrate it with 4 marketing platforms. And this was a big sticking point because they needed these systems to talk to each other, and they speak different languages. And so that was part of what was slowing this down. And so again, we want to think about a scope and a scale for an initial launch that is going to help us meet those priority needs and start to deliver value. And we need to start thinking of time to value in stages and balancing those things to start to get ROI for this very expensive investment. It's costly and it's time consuming. So if it's taking 3 years to get to a launch, that's a lot of money going in and not a lot of value coming out. So nobody wants that. So we recommend thinking about your implementation in stages and starting with an MVP or minimum viable product, and that's your phase 1. So that's going to get you the initial system configuration set up. You get your priority assets centralized. You get some data quality enrichment to make sure that it's going to be really usable for people, and establishing new operational practices, because especially if your organization is new to DAM or expanding the DAM capabilities, you're going to have new workflows. Maybe you have new people, you have different roles. So you've got to get those new practices kind of, that muscle built. So that's going to take a little time. Give yourself some grace there. And then you can start onboarding some of the high priority teams. And then when you get to the next phase, that's when you can think about, okay, how do we onboard more teams so that we can hit that collaboration goal that we had set out at the beginning as one of our outcomes? And okay, we want these things to be integrated because dam is not an island and we need it to speak with other tools, but which are the most high impact integrations that we can do? And then we're going to do those kind of one by one to make sure that they're delivering the value that they're designed to do. So, but not, we got to hit them all before we can even go anywhere with this thing. It's just, that's going to take way too long and be too difficult. And then in the third phase, you can start getting into your more complex and advanced outcomes like omni-channel distribution and dynamic content generation and high performance and performance measurement, et cetera. So those are really important desired outcomes, but not something you can easily tackle in a phase one. So think about those outcomes, phase them, phase the scope, phase the integrations, and then you've got a strategy for your dam system that's going to allow you to get some ROI, get the tool out there, get it being used, and have it start, delivering the value that it was acquired for. All right, so that's kind of actually what I just said. I recapped before I recap. So just to recap, how do you avoid this strategic oversight gap? So strategy is really prioritization. Like if you were to boil down what is strategy, it's what are we going to do to win? So what does winning mean in this case? And what are the top priorities? So we have to establish priorities and then use those to set a scope and start to launch in phases. So you don't get stuck in that multi-year implementation disaster scenario. So what happened to our case study here? What was the outcome? Well, they did launch that system. It did take about 3 years. At least one person was fired in that time. And they had to scale back after all, because when you try to do everything at once, like it is not going to work. And you will learn this lesson the hard way. So we would rather you just learn it from the beginning and don't try this. Don't try this at home. It's not going to work out. Don't try to do all the things, all the integrations, all the assets, all the users, all the everything. So that's my first lesson. Cautionary tale is, yeah, it'll come back to bite you. So that's story number one, and that's our strategic oversight gap. It's just sort of that lack of prioritization, lack of clarity around the purpose and the outcomes you're looking for in the dam system. Unfortunately, not uncommon. Okay, blind spot number two that people tend to overlook is about the operation of the dam system, how it's going to be run. And when I was polling my colleagues the other day here at AVP, I was asking them, tell me share some dam horror stories. What are some of the ones that come to mind? And a lot of them ended up being under this umbrella, this particular blind spot area. So not uncommon at all. It's very tricky because it's about people. And so, yeah, we all know that's going to be a challenge, but we'll see what we need to avoid here. So second horror story. We worked with a business unit within a larger company to implement their instance of this enterprise dam solution. So they had this enterprise platform, and they were giving each business unit sort of their own tenancy within that installation. So each team had their own like homepage, and they could define unique asset types and metadata and permissions. But there was a shared, at the very core, there was a shared backend. So it was really one system, which, is a complex thing to pull off. But in any case, so just on this one particular case, so for this team, we were engaged to configure the system. So we had spent about 4 months doing that. And then we were getting to the launch stage. So it was preparing for launch. And around that time, there was a person who was going to manage the system, and their contract was not renewed. And so we said, okay, what's the plan? Are you going to replace them? What are you going to do? Who's going to manage the system? And they said, well, we're just going to share responsibility for dam admin tasks along with our other responsibilities. And so keep in mind, none of the people here, 5, 6 people, they had any dam experience, and they were all incredibly busy people. They were creative directors, producers, writers, all kinds of different roles that they didn't have time or really probably the inclination or interest to make sure this dam system was going to be successful. So that's the challenge. If you are going into this and thinking, well, it's just going to be a shared set of responsibilities, that may or may not work. In a lot of cases, it doesn't. So just thinking about roles and resources in terms of people that you might need in the implementation stage, and that's really a project stage. You need roles like project managers, business analysts, IT specialists. You need probably somebody who's done some dam implementation before to help you out. Information architecture who can help with the metadata and taxonomy and navigational design, and all that good stuff. But and in this case, for this client, we were playing that role in many of those roles. So, but then when you move into the operational phase, that's when you've gone to the program stage. It's no longer a project, it's a program. It has sub-projects. Like I said, we're going to be launching in phases. We're going to have sub-projects, of course. But you're going to need some ownership around this tool and this program, and that's going to require some different roles. So dam program manager is a type of role that you might need to have. That's kind of a strategic level thinking. Platform owner, who's going to be the one that really gets in the weeds and knows the system, how it's configured, how to make changes, how to troubleshoot, is the person who's the contact for the vendor, all that stuff. And then the librarian roles are the people who are going to make sure that the assets are getting in there, that the metadata is right, that the data quality is good, and all those kinds of things. And of course, we probably still need our IT people to help as we move forward. So that doesn't have to mean that those are positions, like that it's a full-time job, but it is a role that needs to be accounted for. And it doesn't work all that well when it's just, the group's going to be all the roles. It just doesn't play out that way in reality. Because when everybody's responsible, no one's responsible. And the question that we get a lot is like, well, how many people does it take to run the dam program? And the answer is, classic. It depends. But here are the factors that I think it depends on. So the number of assets, the number of users, the number of integrations, and then the complexity of the system itself, because some are rather simple and some are highly configurable, which is amazing, but they do require some in-depth knowledge to make changes to that system. And so that can be another factor. All right, so like a couple different scenarios here, like just to illustrate this. So here are 5 hypothetical organizations. So let's say that organization number 1, very small, number of assets, number of users, et cetera. And maybe it's fine to do that shared ownership thing here. Like that might work in that case. But once we get into organization 2, this is like a typical cultural heritage institution where they have a lot of assets. So we work with a lot of different types of organizations, which is amazing because we get to see different things play out at different organizations. But what we notice is that in our cultural heritage organizations, they have a lot of assets. Sometimes we have clients with tens, hundreds of terabytes, even multiple petabytes of data. This is a lot, but they don't tend to have a ton of users. So the number of users might be the tens of, it might be just, tens of users, hundreds, not that many. But because they have such high volumes of assets that require some sophistication in terms of performance of the system and maybe different kind of asset handling, they probably have a more complex dam system. So that's like organization 2 here, where you've got a lot of assets and you got a complex system. But then like organization 3, that is one where the number of assets compared to that cultural heritage organization. So this might be a typical like enterprise corporate dam where they don't have that many assets. I mean, it's still a lot, maybe 100,000, still a good number, but it's not in the millions. But they have tens of thousands of users all over the world, different geographies, different languages. And so that's where the complexity comes in. And so there's a lot of management of people that needs to happen there versus the other case where it's a lot of management of a lot of assets. So either way, you probably have a complex system to help support those things. You're going to need some people to manage all that stuff. So just that's a couple things you can think about as you're planning for staffing of the dam program. Okay, returning to our story. Remember these guys they lost their dam contractor and they're just going to manage this whole thing themselves. And so we said, okay, well, how is decision making going to work? And they said, well, we're just going to have a steering committee and we'll make all the decisions. So we have to think about what type of decisions are going to be going on here and to see if this is going to work. Once you get into the dam operation, the decisions are going to take many different forms. And so we want to encourage you to establish some form of governance, which would determine who decides, who makes those decisions. And there's going to be different types or categories of decisions. So the first type are more strategic decisions. They're the ones that go into what I was talking about before about things like, well, what are our priorities and what should our roadmap look like? And how much should we invest in integrations this year? That's the kind of stuff that, yeah, maybe a steering committee can handle. But then when you get down to the tactical decisions, you've got to be able to translate those strategic priorities to actual system configurations. So what user groups and permissions are we going to need to enable the right people to find what they need, but not what they don't need? And how should our metadata be structured to support search? And what should be featured on the homepage? And what happens when a new taxonomy term needs to be added? So it's like decisions upon decisions. And so somebody needs to get much deeper into the weeds to really understand these decisions. This is not a committee set of decisions generally to make. That becomes very difficult and very slow. And then once you start operations, then the decisions become, more immediate, like, well, how should I tag this batch of assets? And which of these are selects? And should I approve this access request? So you're taking the sort of tactical guidance and applying those to day-to-day decision making. But again, if it's like a committee type of thing, how's that going to work? It's really not. So something else that we want to avoid is having decision making by committee, or which is in essence a vacuum of decision making. And so, okay, to finalize this story and round it out, the last thing we talked about with them is, okay, how are you going to manage the assets and the metadata and the vocabularies and taxonomy, et cetera? And so they said, well, we're going to have sub teams and they're going to each manage their own assets and metadata and stuff like that. So, it's like you would do in a shared drive situation where, you've got the creative group and they've got their part of Dropbox and this other team has their other part of Dropbox. Everybody's got their little area. So they were kind of treating it like a file system. But a DAM is not a shared file system. It's more like a library. It's more like, in its greatest capability, it's more like Getty Images or something, right? So there are implications to allowing people to just do whatever they want to do in the system, because it doesn't allow for that cross searchability that is one of the key goals behind getting a DAM system normally. So if we have, people just kind of doing it their own way, well, we've got different groups kind of giving dates and, names of campaigns. They're for the same thing, and they're going to call it different things, right? What is this type of image? Well, they're going to have different ways of labeling. And so it becomes really cluttered. The system is not searchable, and that cross-team collaboration breaks down and it just becomes a big mess that nobody wants to use. And so that is also something to very much avoid. And we tried to tell this organization about that risk, and they wanted to give it a go. So how do we avoid this operational gap? Just to recap, we got to get the right people. We need to establish roles and responsibilities, kind of our governance decision making, and then we need some consistency in standards and practices and workflows so that we don't create a big mess in this very expensive dam system. So what happened to that scenario that I told you about, that organization with their dam, and they try to do everything by committee? It went the way of the dinosaurs. This one actually truly was a disaster, and unfortunately, it just didn't end up living to see the light of day, or at least not for very long. So yeah, that just kind of was a non-starter, and the investment in that implementation was kind of a big waste. So that's a really sad story, unfortunately. I'm sorry, they don't all have happy endings. That's why they're horror stories, right? All right, so getting into the third and last blind spot, and horror story number 3. These are adoption shortfalls. Again, I have a lot of these stories, and they have some things in common. But I'm gonna share this through the experience of one of those. And this one I'm gonna call the Dam Design for Dam Managers horror story. And so any of you who are dam managers, this is for you, because you have ideas about how you want the system to be set up and work. And just be careful that you're not designing a system just for you, because it's not for you. It's for other people. All right, so what happened here? Well, let me back up a sec. So this organization had come to us and they said, well, we spent a couple of years, implementing, configuring, and we launched the dam system, and no one's using it. So everybody's coming to us with requests, and they don't actually go to the system. And we said, okay, well, let's talk about what's going on here. So we said, all right, well, we probably need to do some user research. We need to understand what they need so we can make sure that the system is set up to respond to those needs, and that the kind of operation is as well. And they said, well, we already know all about our users. So what do you need to know? And we said, well, who are the primary user groups, and what are their use cases? Why are they coming to the system? What do they need assets for? And they said, oh, we don't know. I mean, essentially, that's what they said. So we said, okay, well, we're going to do that user research. Okay, so just that's what's going to happen. So we don't want to make assumptions about users, because that's not necessarily going to yield that we're going to get to the result that you're looking for. So understanding users' use case and their search needs is important to make sure that system, the foundation of your configuration, is going to meet those different needs. And this is something also to factor into your strategic work that I talked about earlier, and the planning and the scoping, because we don't need to meet all of these needs on day one, but we might need to meet some of them and be ready for the next ones. And one of my colleagues shared a story. So sorry, sidebar, but he had a story about an organization he had worked at where the dam system was developed and was implemented and set up for one group. And then they tried to roll it out to the next group, and it just completely backfired. Like that group they totally rejected it. It did not work for them. So that's another sort of way this could go, whereas it's not like it's just set up for the dam manager, but it's set up for one system, one group, and it doesn't scale, because you have to think about what their use cases are. And so, like, let's take a marketer, and if we're starting with marketing, they want to utilize approved assets for campaigns and presentations and social media. So they need access to pre-approved assets. They need to be brand compliant. They need to be searching by audience and campaign or type, or things like that. And then in our phase 2, we want to bring in the product designers. Well, those people have very different needs in a lot of ways. The way they search, what they're searching for, they need access to versions. They need things that are not approved, right? So we have different permissions there. And then you're bringing in, video production. And so they've got their external agency. That agency is going to have very different needs from the internal producer, who needs access to the full library of assets so that they can get rights clearance if they need to, unlike the marketer, who doesn't even want to see that stuff. They don't want to mess around with rights clearance. They just want to know what's approved for their use. So it just starts to get a little complex if you start digging in. So it's good to know what their needs are. And you can say, you know what, we're not going to accommodate all this. This dam is for X purpose. But again, this goes back to the strategy part. If you don't know what might be the needs, you won't be able to establish those priorities and scope. So do this early and be able to look out for, how you're going to scale out these different needs and use cases. So back to my story again. So in this case, they were, as I already mentioned, they were saying, well, people keep coming to us with requests, and they said they don't like the dam system. They just don't like it. It doesn't work for them. So they'd rather ask us to find assets for them. You think about it, you're like, would you really, if you're looking for an asset and you need it quickly, would you rather go ask somebody to find it for you? Or would you like to just go in somewhere, type it, find it, download it, and use it? I think that the latter, most of us would prefer. So it wasn't that they didn't like it. It just wasn't set up for them to do that. So they really needed to change the way the system was configured. And so we got a plan for a good user experience. And I would say this applies even if the user is not accessing the system directly, but using it in a connected or integrated system. It doesn't mean that user experience no longer applies. User experience is not just a platform or interface thing. It's not the UI. It's the whole experience of trying to fulfill their need or their use case. So a good user experience is going to be, it's going to be easy to navigate. We're going to get accurate and relevant search results. The layout is going to be intuitive, whatever tool I'm in. It's not laggy, and I know if I can use this asset or what I need to do to use it, things like that. Big UX no is too many clicks to do a thing. No one likes too many clicks. I mean, you've done this yourself where you're like, I don't like that tool. It took 3 clicks to do that thing. I mean, we are so conditioned for like these very, very tight user experiences from consumer applications that we use. So when our enterprise tools don't live up to those same expectations, we're not happy. So we have to really think about how to make it easy as possible. Obviously, you're not the developer of the platform, so you have some limitations, but you can do a lot of things as the person who's configuring the system. Making sure the asset organization is logical and meaningful to the people who will be using it, not just to you. Making sure that the metadata is high quality, that it's complete, it's consistent, that it's relevant, that you have relevant facets and filters that are meaningful to people, and you've got to learn from them in order for that to happen. You can't just guess. The permissions need to be optimized for all user roles so that marketing only sees approved assets, but producers can see all of the assets and know that they have to get permission to use them. There's a certain amount of trust there as well. The infrastructure needs to be optimized for the load and demand on the system, because if you're putting in millions of assets and your infrastructure is set up for tens of thousands, you are going to get lag, you are going to get glitches. The system's going to be down all the time, and then people are going to reject it. Nobody likes that. Asset lifecycle management, making sure to expire things or hide things that are no longer relevant. You may need branded and localized interfaces. You may need external interfaces outside of the system to be integrated with. So there's a lot you can do to make sure that this is going to be a good experience for users and that they will adopt it. It doesn't mean that just setting up the system well is going to solve all your problems, but it's certainly going to help. So speaking of which, onboarding, this is another thing in this case where they were, they had done some onboarding with their users, to try to get them to use the system. And we said, okay, well, what did you do? And they said, well, we had a 1-hour training session, but we recorded it and we put the recording in the dam. Like, that's great. What else did you do? Again, remember, this is the case where nobody's using the system and they just keep coming to them for help. So there needs to be more, unfortunately, well, but for better or for worse. Adopting a new tool at work is hard. I think about this all the time whenever I'm sort of asked, or even if it's my idea to use a new tool for something, like just how much of a challenge that really is, because you get into your workflows and it's hard to change. It takes a while to make that shift. So starting your change management early and then bringing people along will really help. So the first thing people need to know is, why are we doing this? So as early as possible in your implementation, letting people know what the problems are that this is going to solve, what benefits it's expected to bring to the organization, what to expect and when. So you're not just, hey, we're launching a new dam, you get a 1-hour training next Tuesday, you got to come, it's mandatory. And that's all they've ever heard about it, other than the rumor mill. So getting ahead of that to manage expectations is going to help and go a long way. And then as you're doing those specification development and configuration, like I said before, you're working with people to know their use cases and their needs, and you're getting buy-in through that process, but also letting them know, like, we're hearing what you're saying and we're trying to respond. And then once you're ready to get closer to your launch, asking people to test and make sure that it is set up for their needs. So that's another thing you can do. And then when you do get to launch, yes, do that 1-hour session, yes, record it and put it in the dam system. But you might need to do more than that. You might need a way for people to ask questions, for people to ask for help, but not abuse the help. Of course, you want to set some limits. Sometimes organizations will do office hours to try to get people to come with their questions. It sometimes works, but a lot of people will just, try something, it doesn't work, and they'll sort of give up. And dams are easy things to work around. If, it's unfortunate, like, that it's not something that, you can cut them off from doing their workarounds. Oftentimes they can still do that. So proactively engaging, reaching out, seeing where people are stuck, asking if they need help, showing them how to do something they might not have seen before or really picked up on. So there's definitely, lots you can do to help with that adoption piece. Okay, so how do I help avoid adoption shortfalls, not be like that organization I was telling you about? So understanding your users' use cases and their search needs, plan for damn good UX, and then initiating change management early. So what happened to that organization that had this problem of no one using the dam? Well, that one actually does have a happy ending. It did take quite a bit of work. So that's my busy cat here, doing a lot of user research, completely changing the system configurations, lots of testing, changing the operations. Meanwhile, they did a major reorg, but there's a happy ending because now they have a system that everybody likes. So that's my happy ending story. Yeah, so that's my third and final horror story for you. And I know somebody wrote basically every dam implementation has some flavor of nightmare. Yes. It's true. Like almost every project has some flavor of nightmare. It's just how big are they going to get, and like how completely derailed are they going to be? So we just want you to know some of those common pitfalls to avoid and look out for.